Thank you.
Call to order this regular meeting of the Lincoln-Lancaster County Planning Commission of February 4th, 2015. A printed agenda is available outside the hearing room, and a copy of the full agenda, including the staff reports, is available at the front of the chambers with the clerk. The Open Meetings Act is posted just inside the doors at the back of the room. If you are here for item 4.2, County Text Amendment 14014, the application has been withdrawn and will not be called for public hearing today. It is no longer on this agenda. If you parked in the parking garage across the street to the north, the exit gate is open and there is no need for a parking pass to exit. Out of courtesy for those attending this meeting, the commissioners and staff cellular phone usage is not permitted in these chambers during any portion of this meeting. We will appreciate your cooperation. We have an announcement from David.
David Carey, Acting Planning Director. Just want to introduce Jerry Rohrbrow. She is our new Jean, and she. We just want to make sure that we introduced her today. We are very pleased to have Jerry with us. She comes to us most recently from a building and safety department, but has about 30 years of experience here with the city and has a lot of skills to bring to the position, and we're sure that she'll do a great job. And we don't expect her to replace Jean's shoes, but to create new shoes that will be hard to fill in many years to come. So I just wanted to announce that Jerry was with us now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you.
The Planning Commission action today is final on items 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, which is every item on today's agenda. Any aggrieved person may appeal final action of the Planning Commission to the City Council by filing a notice of appeal with the City Clerk within 14 days following the action of the Planning Commission. The first item of business is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held January 21st, 2015. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Amy?
Four.
Is that me?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Harris.
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Cornelius.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
That motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
The next item of business is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be called at the same time and will not be scheduled for a separate public hearing unless there is a request for someone wishing to speak or at the request of a commission member. I will ask Jean to read all of the consent agenda items into the record. Once those items are read, she will ask if there's anyone wishing to speak. If you wish to speak on an item on the consent agenda, we would ask that you stand and state that item. That item will then be removed from the consent agenda and scheduled as a separate public hearing under Section 3 of today's agenda. All items remaining on the consent agenda will be voted upon in total with a motion for approval. Jean, will you please call the items on the consent agenda?
Thank you. Item 1.1, Special Permit 15003 for the expansion of a non-conforming use to expand the area for authority to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises, to include an outdoor beer garden. The property is generally located at South 14th Street and Center Park Road. That is 1501 Center Park Road. Item 1.2, Use Permit number 117D for authority to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises in conjunction with a restaurant. This property is generally located at South 14th Street and Garrett Lane, 7300 South 13th Street. The Planning Commission action on both of these items is final unless appealed to the City Council. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed by the Commission?
I see none.
Is there anyone here wishing to speak on either item 1.1 or 1.2?
I don't see any. I'd entertain a motion.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second?
Thank you. Amy?
Core.
Yes.
Harris. Shear.
Yes.
Cornelius.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Motion for approval carries 5-0. Again, this is final action on Special Permit 15003 and Use Permit 117D unless appealed to the City Council.
Thanks, Jean. There are no requests for deferral on today's agenda. We will now proceed to public hearings. The staff will make a brief presentation. The applicant will then be requested to present his or her testimony, followed by those who wish to testify in support, followed by those who wish to testify in opposition. The staff will then be given an opportunity to respond to the testimony, and then the applicant shall have an opportunity for rebuttal. Each person testifying should state their name and address and shall have 5 minutes to speak unless additional time is requested and granted. The timer will go off after 4 minutes. Then you will have 1 minute to wrap up your testimony. The Planning Commission will vote immediately at the close of the public hearing unless the commission votes to defer action or continue the public hearing. Jean, please call the first public hearing item.
Item 4.1 on page 19, special permit number 15002 for authority to construct a wireless facility, a monopole approximately 129 feet in height, on property generally located at West A Street and Coddington Avenue, 1550 South Coddington Avenue. The staff recommendation is conditional approval, and this is final action unless appealed to the City Council. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed?
I see none.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Brian Will, Planning Department. Personal wireless facilities, cell towers in this case, are allowed in any zoning district, but by special permit. And so in this case, the property we're talking about is southeast of the intersection of Coddington and West A. And of course, that's the little neighborhood shopping center located here. The Russ's Market and the other shops through this area here. The tower specifically is shown back here in the very southeast corner of the site, trying to make a mark there. As I said, 129 feet tall. So going through the requirements, provisions, ordinance, we agreed with the applicant that this would be a preferred location. With sort of one caveat. The language of the ordinance talks about personal wireless facilities that can be located in proximity to a neighborhood zoning or a neighborhood residential zoning district, and that are compatible or can be made compatible, to sort of paraphrase it. And so in that regard, because it is adjacent to a neighborhood, we have added some conditions here. One of them is just a note that the required landscaping and screening per the design standards be shown on the plans. They're not part of the plans. But then sort of in addition to that, we're suggesting that the antennas to be located on this tower be of a close-fitting, flush-mounted array. It's sort of a typical thing that we would add in those cases where you're located next to a residential zoning district. We've included that in several applications previously where, say in the back, the backyard of the church, but adjacent to the neighborhood, we've included a condition like that. It's to mitigate or at least as much as possible reduce the visual impact and silhouette of that facility. So with that and with those conditions, staff has supported this and recommending conditional approval. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions Planning Commission might have.
Any questions, Tracy?
I have one. In your report, it talks about possibly locating it at the northwest corner of that property instead of the southeast. Can you tell me kind of why they decided to get away from that?
Well, and I think we'll let the applicant talk about it. I threw that out just as a sort of a suggestion that this isn't the only place on the site where you can locate a facility. I mean, there's, and where I was suggesting, or what was being talked about in the report, was somewhere up in this area where it's open and vacant. Maybe it's a vacant pad site, perhaps. And there's maybe other places on this property where it could go. This isn't the only one, but perhaps the applicant could talk about, why this location is the preferred location on the site.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Maya?
I may have missed it, but it looked as if the height permit is not in the conditions.
Right, that's a requirement separate and apart from this, regardless of the special permit, whether you need that or not. That's a requirement in the zoning ordinance. They have to get a height permit. That'll be done at the time of building permit. And so put it in here to sort of put them on notice in advance. You can do that at any time. Start thinking about now. Actually, if you want to start that process now, you'd be advised to do that.
And there is no reason to put that as a condition that the height permit has to be
it's
filed
separate and apart from this process. It's a requirement. It'd be redundant to add it. It's a requirement anyway, so.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Thanks, Brian. Applicant?
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, thank you for taking the time to hear this and making the effort to have this meeting. Appreciate that. My name is Ralph Weingarten. I work for Falk & Foster, which is a site acquisition provider for Verizon Wireless. My address is 678 Front Avenue Northwest, Suite 110 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In choosing this location, we did try to pick a spot that was kind of tucked away. There's a kind of a notch out of the south east corner of the buildings there with kind of an unused little square grassy parcel there. And to us and to the landowner, that was an ideal location. It's kind of the rear end of the whole store facility. There are dumpsters right across the area of travel from that. Loading docks, pallets stacked behind the store, kind of the mechanical equipment area. So it's kind of naturally the place that the landowner thinks of to put utilitarian type uses. It is a large parcel. There are other options in terms of replacing parking spots or putting it kind of out there more on the corner. Of course, then there are other residences across the street, and you are getting to more visibility from those public roads. So I think wherever you go, there are pros and cons. We feel the location selected is the most appropriate location on the property. There are some homes in the near vicinity, but they've already kind of adjusted to the fact of having the back of the store right there. Garfield Street pretty much dead ends, kind of right even with where the site is located. And if you go down that street, you see that there's a full canopy of trees throughout the street until you get right to the end by the store. Then it kind of opens up and you can see the rear of the store. But for most people driving on that street or living on that street, especially when the trees leaf out, you won't have much of a visibility of the tower. You can just kind of see the back of the store right through the end. And in this case, once the site is up, it'll just be the kind of the wood fencing and back of the store kind of blending in there. The immediate two homes that are on the north and south side of Garfield, right adjacent to the site, along the property line, they've got wood fence and shrubbery probably 15 feet tall that pretty much screens the whole side of their house. So there's, I think, definitely for the people living there, and if there's anyone here today to speak, I'm happy to hear their perspective too. But I think from what I viewed physically on the site, there's definitely a separation kind of between the sense of the neighborhood on the one side of the property line and the store on the other. They've already kind of, blocked that view to the west, kind of out of their visual world for now. In looking through the staff report that was crafted, we do agree with the identification of this location as a preferred location site. We're in agreement with the assessment regarding lack of alternatives and pretty much in harmony with everything the staff has said, except there's two areas of concern. We don't agree that the visual impact should require the proposed conditions that the antennas be strictly flush mounted on the pole. And then the other condition is regarding the screening landscaping under the design standards. Those two conditions are found on page 8 of the staff report. One of them is condition 1.1.1.2, and the other one is 1.1.1.3. And with respect to the condition that a landscape screen be added with plantings, we'd respectfully ask for a waiver from that requirement. As I indicated, this site makes use of a small, otherwise unused portion of ground that's kind of hemmed in by the existing building to the north and to the west. And then the site comes right up to the pavement on the east and south. So as you drive around the building to get to the back where the loading docks are, there's really limited space back there. And to do any kind of planting, we'd have to tear up some of that pavement and kind of further reduce the area around the back of the store. The current use of the property, I think, already produces an impact on those adjacent properties because of the activity in back of the store and kind of the visual aspect there, which I think the neighborhood has already adjusted to and or screened for themselves. And as far as the ground level view, we've got it drawn right now with a wood fence around our ground equipment. And we would respectfully ask that you accept a wooden fence around the site in lieu of landscape plantings in this particular commercial area. And then also with respect to the antenna design, a true flush mount where the antennas are right up against the pole only allows room enough for about one antenna per sector. And so just like 3 antennas would be available at any given level on the pole. Verizon currently has this drawn to have 2 antennas per sector for a total of 6. And right now, it's what I would call a close mount. It's not the full platform, 3-sectored platform. They've got it drawn with standoff arms, so it's far enough away from the pole to allow 2 antennas per sector. If we were to go to a full true flush mount, they'd have to do 3 on one level and then drop down and take up another level with the other 3 antennas, which they could do, but then it starts to eat up space available for co-location. So anyone else coming to the pole would have less spots and less height available, and they too would probably have to use up a couple of levels. And you get that same kind of restriction when you have like a flagpole site where there are limited numbers of, internal compartments. You basically sacrifice some of the co-location ability for that. So in our view, we would respectfully propose that the condition be reworded to not allow a traditional standard platform, but to allow like a close mount with standoff arms. And so that we could kind of keep that same antenna design and stay on that one level and leave the remainder open for co-location. So in summary, we do agree with the staff's recommendation of approval and the remainder of the conditions. We will commit to doing the necessary height permitting given the airport. At this height and this distance from the airport, we don't see a problem, but we'll go through the process to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. We do respectfully request, though, that you approve the application with a change to condition 1.1.1.2 and make that read something along the lines of adding a note stating that the antennas will be limited to close mounting on short standoff arms. And we also ask that you drop condition 1.1.1.3 and instead approve a waiver accepting a wood fence in lieu of the landscaping specified by the design standards. Thank you for your consideration of this, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as well that the public or you might have.
Have you visited with planning staff about these items? And
we've gone back and forth about interpreting. I guess one interpretation we had is on application of the design standards, whether there had to be a ordinance requirement or a condition to trigger those, or whether they had the force of law on their own. Pardon me. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold a little bit. And our interpretation was that to apply the design standards, either there'd be a cross-reference from the ordinance or a condition requiring landscaping in accordance with those design standards. But short of that opportunity for a different interpretation, we would just ask to have that waived in this case. I know there have been other approvals where wood fence has been accepted in lieu of plantings. And given that there are already plantings along the property line next to the existing homes, we feel that those homes themselves have kind of self-screened themselves from it, and so adding the wood fence is an extra measure of protection, but isn't gonna, their view shed isn't gonna change a lot either way.
okay. Other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here else wishing to testify in support of this item? Is there anyone here wishing to testify in opposition of this item? Okay. Staff questions, Brian, I think. Got a few for you. Anybody?
Do you want to comment on the short standoff arm versus flush mount at all?
Yeah, it sounds like it's probably not unreasonable to find some middle ground here if Planning Commission perhaps, because we've done that as well. There's been cases where sort of the middle ground, this short standoff, has been allowed to. I think if the Planning Commission wanted to maybe just modify that condition, that the applicant work with staff to find some, alternate antenna array using those standoff arms. That sounds reasonable.
Okay. What about the landscaping and screening?
Well, there's really been no alternative plan proposed other than just asking for a total waiver, and I guess we got to come back to there is a standard.
Mm-hmm.
He's right, it has been waived in cases, but often it's been where you've got a site that's, say, surrounded by similarly intensive uses, land uses, commercial, industrial, et cetera, or that the site was, fully paved, but still surrounded by like uses.
Mm-hmm.
That standard is really there for cases just like this one, where you have these disparate land uses, something like this, and you've got a neighborhood right adjacent to it. So, I had thought maybe some alternative or middle ground maybe would have been suggested, but it hadn't been. That really what we're talking about here is trying to screen and I think I made a mistake in the staff report. I said screening would help most those properties on the south and west, and I meant south and east.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that, maybe cases to be made here that, to the north and west, the building, the rest of the commercial center, screening is not, necessary. So that maybe that standard is modified, that, something be provided to help screening for those properties to the south and to the west. That sounds to me to be a reasonable compromise.
Okay.
But like I said, totally waiving it, this to me is a circumstance where, for what that standard was, devised for. And so I really haven't seen or heard any.
Well, in particular, it seems as though the objection is primarily to planting, and a substitute of a wooden fence has been proposed.
Sorry, good point. There's two standards here, and if you read the zoning ordinance, and by the way, the design standards, they apply to several titles in municipal code. This one applies specifically to the zoning ordinance, this requirement. There's two standards here. One in the zoning ordinance says the ground shelter equipment shall be screened by a fence. This essentially a 6-foot high fence. There's another standard, though, in the design standards for screening and landscaping, talking about the tower, because those facilities could be located far apart from one another, or they could be located together. But in any event, we're talking now about a separate standard beyond the fence, which is required for the shelter, screening the tower. And that's why half the plantings have to grow to a mature height of 35 feet. They're there to screen the tower, break up that impact versus equipment shelters, which are 6, 8, 10 feet tall, perhaps.
Sure.
So that's really, we're talking about two separate standards, not to be confused with one another.
Okay.
I have a question.
Dennis?
So if the condition for screening were to be waived, would this then continue to be your preferred location recommendation on the site, or would that shift to another part of the site?
I don't think it would be a preferred location. I think we've got a hierarchy: preferred, limited preference, and then sensitive. I think you have to reconsider it, and it probably gets bumped down a notch to limited, or maybe even sensitive. Here again, sensitive, if you read the ordinance, what are we sensitive to? What it's the hierarchy. It's neighborhoods, it's houses where folks live. That really you start building from there. So without these conditions, I think it changes. I think it changes that.
Okay.
Maya?
Could you give us an idea of, in this particular circumstance, of how many trees are we talking about to screen this particular tower? Obviously, not going into specifics, but
It's not going to be a very large number. The site's not that big, and it's only of that screening, of that 70% screen, it's only half of them that have to grow to a mature height of 35 feet. I mean, it's got to be less than 10, I would say. 5 to 10, I'm supposing, somewhere in that range.
Okay.
If I'm wildly wrong, I apologize, but that's off the top of my head.
Thanks.
Brian, am I understanding correctly that they would only have to put those tall trees on the sides that would be, you know, on the residential side?
Well, that's what I'm suggesting. The standard, the requirement would be you screen at 360. But in this case, they've asked for a waiver completely. What I'm suggesting is, well, maybe you don't waive it completely, you modify it. So the standard is that screening requirement only on the south and east edges of the compound there, and that it's essentially waived on to the west and to the north, to the building.
Okay. Anything else? So just to kind of summarize, the flush mount, you're kind of, you think you can negotiate that with the applicant? and-
Modify that language to the standoff that the applicant requested. Yeah.
And then as far as the fencing or the screening, you think we need to have something on south and east?
Yeah, I think, right. We're saying the condition is full 360. They're asking for a total waiver. What I guess I'm suggesting here is, you know, if that were modified to just the south and the west, I don't think staff would have any objection to that, because that's really the area of concern.
Okay.
Can I ask one? So if in that case, would your advice still be 70% on those directions, waiving the rest? If I'm
Yes,
understanding.
to the south and to the east.
But still 70% staying
Yeah,
within the screening?
You would apply the same standard
Okay.
to those two edges and not to the other two.
Got it.
Yeah,
You said south and east, right?
south and east.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
makes sense? Okay.
Applicant rebuttal?
We appreciate staff's comments, and we think that'll work fine with the antenna, understanding regarding the standoff arms and the antenna. Certainly, we would be happier with a partial waiver than none at all. I did take some pictures at the site that I have on my phone, and I don't know if it'll work to show them on here, but I could just offer those up if I can get them to work, just so you kind of see the existing neighborhood property line screening that exists there too. So let me see what I can do here. Let me see. What do I need to hit to activate?
Here you go.
Okay.
You're good?
Oh, if it is.
You can,
Okay, yep, I got you.
you can zoom in and out. Use
Yep, this is looking towards the site down Garfield. Whoops. And I apologize for the quality there. That's the store at the end of the street, and there's kind of a full tree canopy that's kind of reached that mature height already down the street until you get right to the end. So in terms of people up and down the street viewing the tower, we think it's kind of screened by what's growing in the neighborhood already. And then this is a view, if you are on the store property looking towards Garfield, the house just to the north of Garfield, this is what their backyard looks like. There's an existing wooden fence, and they've got some type of evergreen shrub growth, which looks to me to be in the 15-foot range, and then some other mature trees around there. And then in the other direction, this is the end of Garfield here. There's a low fence and shrub right at the end of the street, but then the neighboring house also has a large evergreen tree and some large shrubs. So both of these homes are heavily screened because of the store impact already. So from their windows, or from, I don't know if they even have windows on that side of the house, but there's not really a added impact to them and to the people further in the neighborhood. I think the existing mature tree growth takes care of a lot of that. So to the extent that makes a difference, just wanted to offer that. Thanks.
Questions? So just be clear, are you asking for the full waiver, or are you okay with the partial waiver?
We would prefer the full waiver. That would be our request. We'd have to do some tearing up of concrete and come back, see what things are possible and submit something, that would comply with design standards in those directions otherwise. So my request would be for the full waiver, but if you're not willing to grant that, then we would have to abide by whatever you decide with respect to a condition.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Not sure which way the planning commission's going, but what I was going to suggest is that the two conditions we're talking about simply modified 1.1.1.2 had a note stating that antennas will be limited to only mounting with short standoff arms. I think that gets us to where we're talking about.
Okay.
1.1.3 shall require screening landscape required by design standards to the south and east. If you wanted to modify that, or I think that language works.
Okay. Any rebuttal on that or anything? Okay. Entertain a motion.
I would move approval as, with amendments as suggested by staff.
Second.
Discussion?
We have a set of design standards, and they're there for a reason. We've got, to the east, there may be some screening for further into the neighborhood, but we should consider that boundary right there. And to the south, there is essentially openness and not a lot of screening. I think it's not unreasonable to ask for some screening on that side. And as far as the antenna array goes, it doesn't seem to have a great deal of impact on the short arm, so I don't have any problem with that change.
Other comments?
I tend to agree with Michael on the short arms instead of the flush mounting. I'm perfectly fine with that. I think that it is wise to have require landscaping still on the south and east sides. Not only I know the existing neighbors to the east already have some higher screening, but this will provide some difference in lifespan, so that if those would die out, these would hopefully be grown pretty well up by then and make a difference. So I would support having the screening on the south and the east as well.
Anything else? Okay, I'm going to also support my colleagues and vote to approve. Amy?
Gore,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Shear.
Yes.
Cornelius.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Okay, that motion for conditional approval as amended carries 5-0, and this is final action unless appealed to the City Council. I would point out that item 4.2, County Text Amendment 14014, has been withdrawn.
At this time, anyone wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda may do so. If not, we're adjourned.